What happens when the alien princess you rejected becomes your boss? She remembers everything. The transport shuttle's engines hummed a low familiar tune as it descended through Valerian 5's atmosphere. Commander Kyle Draven pressed his face against the viewport, watching twin suns cast their amber light across what had once been a war-torn wasteland. Now gleaming spires of crystalline architecture pierced the horizon, connected by elevated maglev highways that snaked between floating gardens and commercial districts. 8 years. 8 years since he'd left this place behind, along with the ghosts of decisions that still haunted his sleep. Beautiful, isn't it? Lieutenant Mara Quinn settled into the seat beside him, her ice-blue eyes following his gaze. Hard to believe this was ground zero for the Valerian uprising. Kale's jaw tightened. Beauty has a way of growing over graves. The shuttle banked toward the capital's diplomatic quarter, where the towering Galactic governance complex dominated the skyline. Its bioluminescent walls pulsed with soft purple light, a distinctly mirrorly architectural touch that hadn't existed during the war. Everything here had evolved, transformed, risen from the ashes of conflict into something unrecognizable. Everything except the memories. "Commander Draven," the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "We're cleared for landing. Your liaison from the Morali Royal Court will meet you at Base 7. Kyle nodded, straightening his dress uniform. This mission was supposed to be routine: investigate stolen stealth technology, coordinate with local authorities, file a report, and leave. Clean, simple, professional. So why did every instinct he'd honed over 15 years of military service tell him something was wrong? The shuttle touched down with barely a whisper. As the airlock cycled open, Kale caught his first breath of Valerian air in nearly a decade. It tasted different now, cleaner, with a hint of the exotic flowering vines that draped the terminal's exterior walls. The scent triggered a flood of memories: burning buildings, screaming civilians, and a young Morali princess who'd looked at him like he hung the stars in the sky. "Ready, sir?" Mara asked, checking her sidearm out of habit. "As I'll ever be." They stepped onto the landing platform, boots clicking against polished stone that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. The terminal buzzed with activity: human diplomats, Morali merchants, and a dozen other species conducting business in the universal language of commerce and politics. "Commander Draven," the voice stopped him cold. Rich, melodious, with just a trace of the Morali accent that had once made his name sound like music. He turned slowly, already knowing what he'd see, but somehow still unprepared for the reality. Princess Valari Nikesa stood 10 feet away, and she was magnificent. Gone was the wide-eyed teenager who'd followed him around military briefings, hanging on his every word. The woman before him commanded attention without effort, tall, elegant, draped in robes that managed to be both regal and practical. Her skin held the same pearl-like luminescence as all Morali, but her bearing spoke of power earned, not inherited. Silver ceremonial bracers adorned her forearms, marking her rank as supreme diplomatic envoy. Her dark hair was pulled back in an intricate pattern that left her striking violet eyes unobstructed. Those eyes that had once looked at him with such hope and longing now regarded him with cool, professional assessment. "Your Excellency?" Kale managed a proper bow, though his throat felt suddenly dry. "It's good to see you again." "Commander." Her smile was polite, distant, perfect for the cameras that were undoubtedly recording this reunion. "Welcome back to Valerian 5. I trust your journey was comfortable." 8 years of military discipline kept his expression neutral, but inside, Kale felt like he'd been sucker punched. This wasn't the Valari he remembered. This woman radiated authority, intelligence, and something else, a carefully controlled danger that made his tactical mind sit up and take notice. "The journey was fine, thank you." He gestured to his aide. "This is Lieutenant Quinn, my second in command." Valari's gaze shifted to Mara, and Kale caught the briefest flicker of something: calculation, assessment, whatever it was, passed so quickly he might have imagined it. "Lieutenant Quinn, your reputation precedes you." Valari inclined her head gracefully. "I've read your tactical analyses of the Rigel sector conflicts. Impressive work." Mara blinked, clearly surprised. "Thank you, Your Excellency. I didn't realize my reports had traveled that far." "Information is currency in my line of work, Lieutenant. I make it my business to know the key players in any joint operation." Valari's smile held just a hint of something sharper. "Shall we proceed?" The governance council is eager to begin the briefing. She turned and walked toward a waiting hover car, her movements fluid and confident. Kale found himself studying the way she carried herself, no longer the enthusiastic girl who'd stumbled over ceremonial protocols. This Valari owned every space she entered. "Sir," Mara's voice was carefully neutral. "Everything all right?" "Fine," Kale lied, following Valari toward the vehicle, just adjusting to the changes. As they settled into the hover car's luxurious interior, Valari activated a privacy screen and pulled out a holographic display showing satellite imagery of the planet's northern continent. "Before we begin the formal briefing," she said, her tone shifting to pure business, "I need to bring you up to speed on certain developments. The stolen technology isn't just stealth equipment, it's components for something far more dangerous." Kale leaned forward, his military training overriding personal discomfort. "What kind of components?" "Graviton phase modulators. On their own harmless, but combined with the right quantum resonance chamber." She manipulated the hologram, showing a schematic that made Kale's blood run cold. "You get a weapon capable of tearing apart planetary crusts." "Jesus," Mara breathed. "Who the hell would want something like that?" Valari's violet eyes met Kale's, and for just a moment he saw a flash of the young woman he'd once known, when brilliant, passionate, and absolutely terrified. "That Commander Draven is what we're here to find out." She closed the hologram and leaned back, her mask of professional calm sliding back into place. "And given the delicate nature of certain political relationships involved, I'll be taking point on this investigation." The words hit Kale like a slap. In all his years of command, he'd never been subordinated to a civilian authority during an active investigation. He opened his mouth to object, then caught the warning look in Valari's eyes. She was telling him something without words. Something important. "Of course, Your Excellency," he said carefully. "Whatever resources you need, my team is at your disposal." "Excellent." Her smile was sharp as a blade. "I do so enjoy working with accommodating partners." The hovercar began its descent toward the governance complex, and Kyle found himself studying Valari's reflection in the window. 8 years ago, he'd told a lovesick teenager to grow up to come back when she was ready for the real world. Looking at her now poised dangerous holding cards, he couldn't even see he was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, he was the one who hadn't been ready. The car touched down and Valari stood smoothly, her robes flowing around her like liquid starlight. As she moved toward the exit, she paused beside Kale's seat. "One more thing, Commander," she said quietly, her voice pitched for his ears alone. "The next time someone tells you the past never stays buried, you might want to ask who's been doing the digging." Then she was gone, leaving Kale with the distinct impression that this mission had just become infinitely more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Mara let out a low whistle. "Well, sir, that was intense. Old friend of yours?" Kale watched Valari's figure disappear into the complex's soaring entrance hall, her security detail flowing around her like a protective tide. "Something like that," he murmured, already wondering what other surprises the past had in store for him. Power has a price, and so does silence. The briefing room inside the governance complex was a masterpiece of morale engineering. Holographic displays floated in mid-air, showing real-time intelligence feeds from across 3 star systems. Representatives from a dozen species sat around a crescent-shaped table that seemed to be carved from a single piece of crystalline rock. And at the head of it all sat Valari, commanding the room with an ease that made Kale's chest tighten with something he refused to acknowledge as pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying perfectly to every corner of the room. "What we're dealing with isn't simple theft. It's an act of interstellar terrorism with implications that could destabilize the entire sector." The hologram shifted, showing cargo manifests and shipping routes. Kale found himself leaning forward despite his lingering discomfort. Whatever else had changed about Valari, her mind was still razor sharp. The stolen graviton modulators were part of a larger shipment bound for the research station on Kepler 442b. Someone with inside knowledge intercepted them during the transfer at the neutral zone depot. Her violet eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Kale. "Commander Draven, given your experience with insurgent tactics, what patterns do you see?" 8 years of command experience kicked in automatically. The timing suggests inside coordination. These weren't opportunistic raiders. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for and when to take it. He gestured toward the shipping data. But the route they used to escape suggests they're not familiar with standard military protocols, possibly civilian contractors or sympathizers. Excellent analysis. Valeri's approval sent an unwelcome warmth through his chest. Which brings us to our next phase of investigation. She touched a control surface and the hologram zoomed in on a bustling commercial district near the planet's equator. Intelligence suggests the stolen components are being stored at a black market facility in the Cathara trade sector. It's neutral territory, technically outside our jurisdiction, but perfect for a fishing expedition, Mara finished. Precisely. However, this particular establishment caters to a very exclusive clientele, the kind that doesn't appreciate law enforcement dropping by for casual inspections. Valeri's smile held a dangerous edge, which is why we'll be conducting our investigation creatively. The room erupted in murmurs. Kale felt his tactical instincts sharpening. What kind of creative are we talking about? The kind that requires you to trust me completely. Commander. Valeri stood, her robes flowing around her like liquid shadow. Report to my quarters at 1900 hours. We have a cover story to develop. As the briefing dispersed, Kale found himself walking alongside Mara through the complex's spiraling corridors. The lieutenant had been unusually quiet since leaving the briefing room, and he could practically hear the gears turning in her head. Permission to speak freely, sir. Always. Mara stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression serious. That woman in there, she's not the same person you knew 8 years ago. She's running this operation like she's been doing it her whole life. Hell, she's running everyone in that room, including you. Kale opened his mouth to object, but Mara held up a hand. I'm not saying it's bad, sir. I'm saying it's dangerous, for the mission and for you personally. Her ice blue eyes were unwavering. That girl you pushed away, she's the one running this war now, and I get the feeling she remembers exactly how that conversation went. The words hit closer to home than KL cared to admit. He'd been thinking the same thing since the moment Valeri walked into that landing bay, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that set his teeth on edge. Noted, Lieutenant, but right now she's also our best chance of stopping whatever's happening here before it escalates into something worse. Just watch yourself, sir. Women like that don't forgive easily, and they never forget. 1900 hours came faster than Kale would have liked. Valeri's quarters occupied an entire floor of the diplomatic wing with panoramic windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city below. As night fell, the bioluminescent architecture began to glow, turning the skyline into something from a fever dream. Punctual as always, Valeri observed as he entered. She'd changed from her formal robes into something more practical, a flowing tunic and fitted pants that somehow managed to be both elegant and functional. Would you like something to drink? I have actual earth whiskey. That's unexpectedly thoughtful. I've learned to appreciate human customs over the years. She poured 2 glasses from a crystal decanter, the amber liquid catching the light. Besides, you'll need it for what I'm about to propose. Kale accepted the glass but didn't drink, which is the Cathara trade sector caters to wealthy couples looking for exclusive entertainment. Arms dealers, smugglers, corporate executives conducting business they'd rather keep off the official books. She moved to stand by the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Security is tight, but they have a weakness for high-profile romantic partnerships, the kind that generate gossip and attract attention. Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. You want us to pose as lovers. I want us to become the kind of couple that everyone wants to watch, but no one wants to cross. She turned to face him, and the intensity in her violet eyes made his breath catch. Think about it, KL, a decorated human commander and a Morali princess conducting a very public, very passionate affair. We'd have access to places and conversations that would take a month of traditional investigation to penetrate. Absolutely not. The refusal was automatic, born from 8 years of carefully maintained professional distance and the uncomfortable awareness that proximity to Valeria had always been dangerous for his peace of mind. Why not? Her voice was deceptively calm, but he caught the flash of something sharper underneath. Afraid you can't handle pretending to be attracted to me? That's not the issue. Then what is? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with years of unspoken history. Kale found himself studying her face, looking for traces of the young woman who'd once looked at him like he could move mountains. Instead, he saw steel, wrapped in silk intelligence, sharpened by experience, and a hint of vulnerability that she was working very hard to hide. The issue, he said finally, is that mixing personal history with operational necessity is a recipe for disaster. Personal history? Valeri's laugh was soft and bitter. What we are calling it. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the subtle perfume. She wore something floral, with an underlying hint of ozone that was uniquely Marilee. Close enough to see the faint luminescence in her skin that marked her as different, alien, other. Let me be very clear about something, Commander Draven. This mission isn't about whatever happened between us 8 years ago. It's about preventing a weapon of mass destruction from falling into the hands of people who would use it to commit genocide. Her voice dropped to just above a whisper. So I'll ask you again, can you handle pretending to be in love with me for the sake of the mission? The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, and Kale found himself responding to it, despite every instinct that screamed danger. Fine, but we do this by the book. Professional boundaries, clear objectives, extraction, plan if things go sideways. Of course. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. The next few hours were spent crafting their cover story. Marcus Kane, wealthy arms merchant with connections to several human corporations. Valera Endes, his Morali lover and business partner, with her own network of contacts in the exotic weapons trade. They would be attending a private auction at the Twilight Garden, one of the sector's most exclusive establishments. As they worked through the details, Kale found himself grudgingly impressed by Valeri's thoroughness. She'd thought of everything from their financial backgrounds to the specific quirks that would make their relationship believable. It was clear she'd been planning this operation for longer than she'd let on. There's one more thing, she said as they finalized the last details. For this to work, we need to convince everyone that we're completely obsessed with each other. That means public displays of affection, intimate conversations. The whole performance. Define public displays of affection. Nothing that would violate your precious professional boundaries, she said dryly. But hand-holding casual touches at the occasional kiss for the cameras. Can you handle that? Kale looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't the wide-eyed girl who'd followed him around 8 years ago. This was a woman who'd transformed herself into exactly the kind of person he'd told her to become. Strong, capable, dangerous in all the right ways, and absolutely devastatingly beautiful. I can handle it, he said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. Good. She moved to her desk and pulled out a small device, activating a privacy screen that hummed softly in the background. Because there's something else you need to know before we begin this operation. The seriousness in her tone made him straighten. What? For the first time since their reunion, Valeri's mask of professional calm slipped. What he saw underneath made his blood run cold. Everything I've told you about this investigation is true, but I haven't told you why I'm really here or why I insisted on taking point on this mission. She moved to pour herself another drink, her hands not quite steady. The truth is, I've been working deep cover for the past 3 years, infiltrating the very network we're trying to stop. Jesus, Valeri. Deep cover among your own people. Some of the most powerful members of the Morali Council are involved in this conspiracy. They're planning to use the graviton weapon to stage a false flag attack against human colonies, then blame it on radical elements to justify a war that will put them back in power. Her violet eyes met his, and he saw the weight of years of isolation and deception. I've been feeding intelligence to Galactic security, but I needed someone I could trust to help me bring down the entire network. The implications hit him like a physical blow. You requested me specifically for this mission. I requested the best tactical mind I knew. Someone who wouldn't ask questions when I needed them to trust me completely. She set down her glass and moved to stand directly in front of him. Someone who once told me to come back when I was ready for the real world. The words hung between them, heavy with 8 years of unspoken meaning. Kale found himself looking into those violet eyes and seeing not the lovesick teenager he'd rejected, but the woman she'd become. Strong, brilliant, carrying burdens that would have broken most people. "This was never about you, Kyle," she said softly. "I'm not the lovesick girl anymore. I'm the one trying to stop a civil war." And in that moment, looking at the woman Valari had become, Kale realized that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to fall in love with her all over again. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home. Loyalty is tested in blood. The Twilight Garden lived up to its reputation as the most exclusive establishment in the Kythara trade sector. Built into the side of a floating mountain, its terraced levels cascaded down through clouds of bioluminescent mist. Private dining pods hung suspended over bottomless caissons connected by bridges that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. Kale adjusted his collar for the third time, the unfamiliar weight of civilian clothes making him feel exposed. The Marcus Kane identity came with an expensive wardrobe that screamed wealth and questionable morals. Beside him, Valari had transformed into Valera Indes, her regal bearing traded for something more predatory, more dangerous. "Nervous," she murmured out, her hand finding his arm as they approached the reception desk. "Focused," he corrected, but her touch sent an unwelcome jolt of electricity through his system. 3 days of practicing their cover story had been an exercise in controlled torture. Every casual caress, every staged moment of intimacy had felt increasingly real. The hostess, a tall Andromedian with silver skin and too many teeth, scanned their credentials with obvious approval. "Mr. Kane, Ms. Indes, welcome to the Twilight Garden. Your usual table is prepared." They were led through a maze of floating platforms to a private pod overlooking the main auction floor. Below them, beings from across the galaxy mingled in small groups, their conversations a low hum of conspiracy and commerce. There, Valari breathed her lips, brushing his ear as she pointed toward a group near the central dais. "Corvin Threx Arms, dealer to half the rebel movements in the Outer Rim. If anyone knows where our stolen components ended up, it's him." Kyle followed her gaze to a heavy-set Bolian with cybernetic implants covering half his skull. The being was deep in conversation with two figures whose faces were hidden by holographic masks. "How do we approach without seeming obvious?" "We don't." Valari's smile was sharp as she signaled for service. "We make him come to us." What followed was a masterclass in social manipulation that left Kale grudgingly impressed. Valari worked the room like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, dropping hints about exclusive merchandise and profitable partnerships. Within an hour, they had 3 different arms dealers competing for their attention. Corvin Threx was the fourth. "Marcus Kane," the Bolian rumbled, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on Kyle. "I've heard interesting things about your work in the Rigel sector." "All true, I'm sure," Kale replied smoothly, falling into the character they'd crafted. "Though I prefer to let my work speak for itself." And the lovely Valera. Threx's gaze lingered on Valari in a way that made Kale's jaw tighten. "They say you have connections to some very exclusive suppliers." "I have connections to many things." Valari purred her hand, sliding possessively across Kale's chest. "The question is whether you have anything worth trading for." The dance continued for another 20 minutes, each party probing for weaknesses while revealing nothing of value. Finally, Threx leaned back in his chair, his mechanical eye clicking as it cycled through different spectrums. "I might have something that would interest buyers with your particular tastes. Graviton phase modulators fresh from a military shipment, still in their original containment units." Kale felt Valari's hand tighten almost imperceptibly on his arm. They'd found their target. "That's a very specific piece of equipment," Kale observed. "What makes you think we'd be interested?" "Because 3 days ago you were asking very particular questions about quantum resonance chambers on the black market forums." Threx's smile revealed too many teeth. "The kind that would pair beautifully with graviton modulators to create something truly spectacular." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Someone had been tracking their investigation, anticipating their moves. This wasn't just arms dealing, it was a trap. "Fascinating," Valari said, her voice steady despite the danger they'd just walked into. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private." Threx gestured toward a service corridor. "My thoughts exactly." They followed the Bolian through a maze of maintenance tunnels that led deeper into the mountain. Kale's tactical instincts screamed warnings, but they needed to see this through. Whatever was happening here was bigger than stolen components. The corridor opened into a vast chamber carved from living rock. At its center sat a device that made Cahill's blood run cold. It looked like a metallic flower, its petals formed from graviton modulators arranged around a central core that pulsed with malevolent energy. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The voice came from the shadows, cultured and familiar. A figure stepped into the light, and Valari went rigid beside him. "High Counselor Marek," she whispered, her voice carrying a lifetime of betrayal. The elderly Morali smiled, his weathered features showing genuine fondness. "Hello, my dear. You've grown into everything I hoped you would become." Cahill's mind raced as connections formed. Marek had been Valari's mentor in the royal court, the one who'd sponsored her rise to diplomatic prominence, the one she trusted above all others. "You're behind this," Valari said, her voice hollow. "The theft, the conspiracy, all of it." "Behind it," Marek laughed, the sound echoing off stone walls. "Child, I created it. The Morali Empire was meant to rule the stars, not bow before human expansion. This device will give us the power to reclaim our destiny. By committing genocide, by demonstrating strength." Marek gestured toward the weapon. "One human colony tragically destroyed by a terrorist attack using stolen Morali technology. The resulting war will unite our people and justify the expansion we should have begun decades ago." Cahill stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward a weapon that wasn't there. "You're talking about murdering millions of innocent people. I'm talking about survival human. Your species breeds like a plague, consuming resources and expanding across worlds that rightfully belong to others." Marek's eyes glowed with fanatic fervor. "We will stop you before you poison the entire galaxy." "This isn't the way," Valari pleaded. "There has to be another solution." "There was," Marek said sadly, "but you chose to betray your own people for the sake of your human pet. Did you really think I didn't know about your little investigation? Every report you filed, every secret you thought you'd uncovered, all of it came through channels I control." The trap closed around them with perfect precision. Security doors sealed the chamber as armed figures emerged from concealment. Cahill counted at least a dozen, all carrying military-grade weapons. "However," Marek continued, "you've given me something I didn't expect. Commander Cahill, Draven, hero of the Valerian campaign. Your presence here will add credibility to our narrative. A tragic love story cut short by terrorist violence." "You son of a bitch," Cahill snarled. But Valari's hand on his arm stopped him from doing something suicidal. Now, Commander. There's no need for unpleasantness." Marek nodded to his guards. "Take them to the holding cells. We'll need them alive until after the weapon is deployed." As the guards moved forward, Valari stepped closer to Cahill, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "When I give the signal, go left. There's an emergency exit behind the third support pillar." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." But Cahill saw the lie in her eyes, the resignation of someone who'd already made an impossible choice. Before he could stop her, Valari spun away from him, her hands moving in a pattern he didn't recognize. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every piece of technology in the chamber began to scream. Emergency lights flashed, containment fields collapsed, and the graviton weapon's core began to pulse erratically. "Neural feedback cascade," Valari shouted over the chaos. "Morali diplomatic implants have override codes for security systems. The weapon is destabilizing." Marek's face contorted with rage. "Kill them! Kill them both!" The chamber erupted into chaos. Guards opened fire as Cahill dove for cover, but their shots went wide as the destabilizing weapon created gravity fluctuations that threw off their aim. He rolled behind a support pillar just as Valari stumbled, blood flowing from her nose, where the neural feedback was taking its toll. "The exit," he shouted, but she shook her head. "The weapon's core is still stable. If I don't complete the shutdown sequence, it'll go critical anyway." More figures poured into the chamber, and Cahill recognized the distinctive armor of Morali Special Forces. But these weren't Marek's people. They were fighting the guards, cutting through them with military precision. In the center of the chaos stood a figure in black combat armor, moving through the battle like Deathbow incarnate. Cahill caught a glimpse of the face beneath the helmet and felt his world shift. Kelsar, the fanatical warlord who'd led the Valerian uprising 8 years ago. The one Cahill thought he'd killed. Impossible, he breathed. But there was no mistaking that scarred face or the way the man moved. Kelsar had somehow survived their final confrontation and now stood between them and escape. The warlord's eyes found Kyle across the chaos, and his smile was a promise of vengeance 8 years in the making. "Commander Draven," Kelsar called out, his voice carrying over the sounds of battle. "I was hoping we'd meet again." Kale looked around desperately. Valari was still working to shut down the weapon, her face pale with effort. Marek's guards were falling back under assault from Kelsar's forces, and in the center of it all, the graviton device pulsed with increasing instability. Time was running out. "Valari," he shouted, "how long do you need?" "2 minutes. I'll get you 2 minutes." Kale broke from cover, drawing the ceramic knife that had passed through security scanners. It wasn't much against armed opponents, but it was what he had. He sprinted toward Kelsar, dodging weapons fire and falling debris. The warlord saw him coming and laughed. "Still the same reckless human. Have you learned nothing from our last encounter?" They collided in a fury of violence that sent shockwaves through the chamber. Kelsar was stronger and better armed, but Kyle had 8 years of additional combat experience and the desperate motivation of a man protecting someone he loved. The fight was brutal and personal, both warriors using every trick they'd learned in decades of warfare. They crashed through equipment and debris, neither giving ground. Around them, the battle raged as Marek's remaining forces fought to protect the weapon, while Kelsar's troops tried to secure the chamber. "You cost me everything," Kelsar snarled, landing a blow that sent Kale reeling. "My army, my cause, my face." He gestured toward the scars that covered half his skull. "But I rebuilt myself, made myself stronger." "Good for you," Kale gasped, rolling aside as Kelsar's blade sparked off stone. Still an asshole, though. They grappled again, and this time Kale managed to get inside Kelsar's reach. His knife found the gap in the warlord's armor, sliding between ribs to pierce his lung. Kelsar stumbled, blood frothing from his lips. "1 minute," Valari called out, her voice strained with effort. But Kelsar wasn't finished. With a roar of rage, he triggered something on his armor. The chamber filled with the high-pitched whine of an overloading power cell. "If I can't have my revenge," he gasped, "then we all die together." The explosion would tear apart the chamber and destabilize the weapon beyond any hope of control. Kyle looked toward Valari, still bent over the control console, her hands moving in complex patterns as she fought to complete the shutdown sequence. She looked up, their eyes met across the chaos, and he saw her make the same impossible choice she'd been making for years, choosing duty over safety, choosing others over herself. "Kale, get out of here. Not without you." But even as he said it, he knew it was too late. Kelsar's armor was seconds from detonation, and Valari was still working to prevent a catastrophe that would kill millions. Then she did something that stopped his heart. Valari abandoned the console and threw herself between Kale and Kelsar just as the warlord's armor exploded. The blast caught her full in the chest, sending her flying into the chamber wall. But her sacrifice bought Kyle the seconds he needed to complete her shutdown sequence. The graviton weapon powered down with a subsonic groan that seemed to shake the mountain itself. Emergency systems kicked in, sealing breach points and stabilizing the chamber. The immediate crisis was over. But Valari lay motionless against the wall, her breathing shallow and her luminescent skin flickering like a dying star. Kyle crawled to her side, his own injuries forgotten. "Valari, stay with me. Help is coming." Her violet eyes found his and she smiled. "Did we stop it?" "Yeah, we stopped it." His voice broke. "You saved millions of lives. Good." She coughed and he saw blood on her lips. "That's what you taught me, 8 years ago, that sometimes the right choice is the hard choice." "I was wrong," he whispered, gathering her into his arms. "About everything. I was wrong to push you away. Wrong to think you weren't ready. You were always stronger than me." "Not stronger," she said softly. "Just stubborn. Very, very stubborn." Around them, the sounds of battle faded as Kelsar's remaining forces were neutralized and Marek was taken into custody. But all Kale could focus on was the woman in his arms, the one who transformed herself into exactly what the galaxy needed. "Don't you dare die on me," he said fiercely. "Not now. Not when I finally figured out how much I love you." Valari's smile widened even as her eyes began to flutter closed. "Took you long enough, Commander." Then the medical teams arrived, and Kael found himself pushed aside as they fought to save the woman who'd saved them all. What grows from ruin can still bloom. 6 months later, Kael stood in the observation deck of the new Valerian Medical Center, watching the twin suns paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The city had changed again since the crisis, growing more integrated as human and Morali architects worked together to rebuild what the conspiracy had damaged. Below him, construction crews were putting the finishing touches on the human Morali governance complex, a soaring structure that seemed to grow from the planet's crystal formations while reaching toward the stars. It was meant to be a symbol of cooperation, a monument to what could be achieved when different species work together instead of against each other. The doctor said, "She's asking for you again." Kael turned to find Mara approaching her, expression carefully neutral. His former second-in-command had been promoted to handle the military side of the joint operations, while Kael had accepted a very different kind of assignment. How is she today? Stubborn as ever, she's threatening to discharge herself if they don't let her attend the complex dedication ceremony tomorrow. Mara's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. Sounds familiar? Kael made his way through the medical center's corridors, nodding to staff members who'd become familiar faces over the past months. Valari's recovery had been slower than anyone hoped, the neural feedback damage requiring experimental treatments that pushed the boundaries of both human and Morali medicine. But she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. Her room was filled with flowers from a dozen worlds, gifts from diplomats and dignitaries who understood that her sacrifice had prevented an interstellar war. But Kael only had eyes for the woman sitting by the window, her luminescent skin still pale, but her violet eyes as sharp as ever. "Ambassador Draven," she said with a mock formality, "how good of you to visit." "Princess Nikessa," he replied, settling into the chair beside her bed. "I hear you're causing trouble for the medical staff. I prefer to think of it as providing motivation." She gestured toward the window where the governance complex gleamed in the afternoon light. "They want to keep me here for another week, but I'm not missing that dedication ceremony. Too many people work too hard to make it happen." Kael studied her profile, noting the way she watched the construction crews with intense focus. 6 months of recovery hadn't dimmed her passion for the work they'd started together. If anything, it had sharpened her determination to build something lasting from the ashes of the conspiracy. "The Council approved your proposal for the Joint Defense Initiative," he said. "Full integration of human and Morali early warning systems, shared intelligence protocols, the whole package." "Good. Marek's people won't be the last to try something like this." Her expression darkened for a moment. "Speaking of which, how did his trial go?" "Life imprisonment on 12 worlds. The evidence you gathered made conviction inevitable." Kael reached for her hand, noting how her skin had regained some of its natural luminescence. "He won't hurt anyone else." "And Kelsar's network? Dismantled. Your intelligence led us to cells on 15 different planets. The arms dealers, the corrupt officials, the whole infrastructure." He squeezed her fingers gently. "You saved more lives than we'll ever know." Valari was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on something beyond the window. When she spoke, her voice was soft, thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't pushed me away 8 years ago?" The question caught him off guard. They'd talked about many things during her recovery, but never directly about that night on Valerian when he'd broken a young woman's heart. "Every day," he admitted, "but I think I know the answer. Which is, you wouldn't have become who you are now, strong enough to go deep cover for 3 years, smart enough to outmaneuver some of the most dangerous people in the galaxy, brave enough to sacrifice yourself for millions of strangers." He turned to face her fully. "I told you to come back when you were ready for the real world. The truth is, you were always ready. I just wasn't ready for you." Valeri's smile was soft, transformative. "Took you long enough to figure that out. I'm a slow learner. Good thing I'm patient." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun's progress across the sky. Finally, Kael reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box that had been burning a hole in his pocket for weeks. "There's something I wanted to ask you." Valeri's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a ring unlike anything she'd ever seen. The band was crafted from pure Valerianite crystal, the rare mineral that formed deep in the planet's core. But it was the stone that took her breath away. Set in the center was a dual-phase crystal that seemed to shift between deep blue and brilliant violet, reflecting the exact colors of both their eyes. It took the artisans 3 months to craft it, Kale said, his voice suddenly nervous. The Valerianite had to be mined from the deepest caverns, and the dual-phase crystal is one of only a few ever discovered. Kale, let me finish. He slipped from his chair to kneel beside her bed, the box trembling slightly in his hands. 8 years ago, I told you to come back when you were ready for the real world. I was an arrogant ass who thought he knew what strength looked like. But you proved me wrong in every way that matters. Tears sparkled in her violet eyes, but she said nothing, letting him find his words. You became everything I never dared hope for. A partner who challenges me, a woman who makes me want to be better than I am, a leader who can change the course of history with her courage. He took a shaky breath. I can't imagine this world without you in it, Valari. I don't want to throw an eye. He lifted the ring from its box, the crystal catching the light and throwing rainbows across the walls. Will you marry me? For a moment that lasted an eternity, Valari said nothing. Then her smile bloomed like sunrise, transforming her entire face. I always get what I want, Commander, she said, extending her hand, and I've wanted you for 8 years. The ring slid onto her finger like it had been made for her, which in every way that mattered it had. Kael leaned forward to kiss her, and she met him halfway, her lips warm and soft and tasting of hope. When they broke apart, Valari held up her hand to admire the ring in the dying light. It's beautiful, she whispered. But you know what the best part is? What? It matches our eyes perfectly. Now everyone will know we belong together. Kael laughed, the sound carrying 8 years of regret, healing, and joy. I love you, Princess Nikessa. I love you too, Ambassador Draven. The next morning, they stood together on the balcony of the new Human Morale Governance Complex, watching the twin suns rise over a city that had been reborn from the ashes of war. Below them, representatives from dozens of worlds gathered for the dedication ceremony, but Kael only had eyes for the woman beside him. Valari wore her formal diplomatic robes, the deep purple fabric complementing the crystal that now adorned her finger. She looked every inch the princess she'd been born to be, but also every inch the leader she'd chosen to become. Are you ready for this? She asked, gesturing toward the crowd below. Ready for what, the ceremony, or spending the rest of my life with the most dangerous woman in the galaxy? Both. Kael slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close as the morning light painted everything in shades of gold and possibility. Then let's get started. As the twin suns climbed higher into the alien sky, their light caught the crystal in Valari's ring and scattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was, Kael thought, the perfect metaphor for what they'd built together. Something that had emerged from darkness and chaos, but which now promised to light the way for generations to come. The ceremony began below, speeches about cooperation and unity filling the air. But on the balcony, high above, 2 people who'd found their way back to each other stood watching the dawn of a new era, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. After all, some love stories are worth waiting 8 years to tell. And some battles are worth fighting for the rest of your life. Sometimes the best revenge is proving them wrong. Valari didn't just get her man, she got her respect. In Kewam, he finally learned that the strongest people aren't always the ones giving orders. What did you think of this story? Did Valari's 8-year transformation surprise you? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this tale of second chances and alien romance, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic sci-fi stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.